Hi everyone, welcome to another session of Pragati Vichar Literature Festival Authors Marathon. The name of this session is going to be Sacred Stories and Modern Minds. And the theme of this session will be Myth and Meaning. Today we have with us three esteemed guests and authors with their wonderful minds and the books that they've published. Our first guest for today's Authors Marathon is Mr. Prabhu Ram. Mr. Prabhu Ram is a banker, bilingual writer, novelist, and an avid music enthusiast. He grew up in South India and currently lives in London, UK with his wife and two children. A postgraduate of Manchester Business School, he's a senior executive at an European investment bank. In addition to his writing, Mr. Prabhu Ram is a strong advocate for mental health and well being using literature and education as tools to raise awareness and actively leading fundraising efforts as well. Senior executive and business leader with more than 25 years of experience in the investment banking, fintech, management consulting domain with a proven track record of delivering robust leadership, operations, strategy, and transformation. Along with that, technology change across tier 1 investment banks and strategist with a keen eye for transformation, client relationships, cost management, business revenues, risk management, and controls. Basically, he's a seasoned leader with large scale people management expertise, location strategy, and regulatory governance. We welcome you, Mr. Prabhuram, for the Authors Marathon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Moving on to the next guest, that is Dr. Rajeev Krishna Saxena. Dr. Saxena, born in 1951 from New Delhi, did his PhD from AIMS, New Delhi. He had a long and illustrious career as a researcher. He was a professor of immunology, dean and pro vice chancellor of JNU. He later played a key role in founding the South Asian University, where he served as a professor, dean, and vice president of the university. His research collaborations took him for several long stints in the USA, 13 years as a visiting professor. He is an internationally recognized immunologist, biotechnologist, and has published about 175 research papers. He was also elected fellow for all major prestigious science academies of India. Besides being an academician, scientist, and a teacher, Professor Saxena is also a writer, a poet, and has published 𝐏𝐫𝐞𝐝 Madhuri, a translation of the 700 Sanskrit shloks of Gita into metered Hindi verses. His second book, Bal Gita, is essentially a message of Gita for children in form of a long Hindi poem published by Penguin Books in 2010. His third book, The Hilltop Temple, was published recently in 2025 by Zorba Books. In The Hilltop Temple, he writes the story of modern science professor who gets a chance to have one-on-one dialogues with ancient Indian masters like Kapil, Patanjali, Shankara and Lord Krishna as well. The illustrated fictional work would introduce the readers to the spiritual tradition in ancient India that forms the basis of the modern Indian society. We welcome you, Professor Rajeev Saxena.
You?
Now, moving on to our last and the third guest, Mr. Bhaskar Som. Mr. Bhaskar, a management consultant by profession, has over 30 years of cross sector experience in corporate advisory, strategy formulation, risk management, data analytics, and climate change. Mr. Bhaskar is a GARP certified financial risk manager and a sustainability and climate risk champion. Over the years, Mr. Bhaskar has been fortunate to travel extensively across India and the world. These travels have helped him understand and appreciate different cultures and connect with people from diverse backgrounds, making him realize that human development is a story of migration and a family's identity is also evolving. Mr. Bhaskar's debut novel, The Raja of Jongal Badi, is an attempt to drive home this point. Mr. Bhaskar holds a postgraduate degree in management from IIM Calcutta and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras. He currently resides in Mumbai, India. Welcome,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bhaskar. Let's get to the questions as to what we will be discussing today. This is a question that I would like to ask all the authors that, mythology continues to shape how we understand ourselves and our societies as well. How do you see the relevance of mythic storytelling in a world driven by technology, science, and data, Because even today in this world as well, people tend to think that mythology means something which is mythical, which is not, which was not present. But when we talk about the Indian ancient history, that is a little different opinion of everybody. So, what is your opinion that how do you see the relevance of mythic storytelling in the world driven by technology, science, and data?
Who do you want to start with? Twinkle.
Anyone can answer. So, it's a basic, it's a
I
general
will
question
take a
for
start.
all the panelists.
I think you nicely said it because I said it in one of my previous interviews as well. The mythology, I see that as a genre rather than mythology as a word, because genre captures the ocean of Indian scriptures and Vedic wisdom and everything that is available and present in many Puranas. I think the key point here is that it's historic. Either you can call it as historic, scriptures, or you can call it as ancient scriptures versus mythology, and that's what it is. The fact is that many of these ancient scriptures that we are referring to contain abundant information about our ancestral wisdom that we are talking about. For example, if you take the Bhagavatam, it talks about cosmic manifestation, which kind of explains the yugas and kalpas and everything. If you kind of connect that back to the scientific, exploration of what we are talking about, if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, that we prove it with examples. But Bhagavatam already explains it. If you look at the Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga, Kali Yuga, and everything, you put that together, and what is the time that the Yuga cycles and how exactly it has manifested. That could be one example. I think we can kind of draw parallels to some of the things that we very much read in the context of what you see in Bhagavad Gita, the yoga system. It's kind of nicely laid out, and of course, Rajiv ji has nicely done justice to from what you explained in terms of giving interpretations to all of it, the Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, and how it kind of aligns. It's science, but it is spirituality, and hence there is a strong relevance and connection with respect to what we are trying to sort of disseminate to the generations through the writing, and that's what our job, which is as writers, that we try to do, to kind of bring in the specific wisdom that is present in scriptures in a modern way. But what we end up doing is we have to rely on, say for example, I spoke about cosmic manifestation present in Bhagavata Purana, but today we need James Webb Telescope that is up in the air for that to prove how the cosmology and cosmic manifestations is, the Milky Way is, and etc. etc. So we need humans, we need empirical wisdom, evidence to prove everything, and that's the problem. There is no disconnect between what is science versus what is spirituality. There has always been a relevance, but it is us as humans. We always try to connect this. We want evidence. As the age progresses, we are relying on evidence to prove everything, and that's where the problem starts. I think let me hand over to the other authors for them to add to it.
Rajiv ji, you go ahead.
Okay, sure. Well, it was just mentioned that the universe is about 13, 14 billion years old. But on Earth, the life actually came about 3 billion years ago. And then evolution to human beings. And what is important here is the development of language. Evolution of language is about 50,000. That's the general consensus, that human language started developing about 50,000 years ago. But if you look at our history, that is only goes up, 3,000, 4,000 BC at about 5,000. So there is a huge black box between when people learn to start speaking and thinking, and then till the time when we actually started writing or recording. So these whole several thousands, tens of thousands of years, people were thinking. And this was a very prominent activity on Indian subcontinent. And our Rishi Munis, they were thinkers, and they evolved a lot of explanations and their worldview. And this has been scattered all over in Vedas, in Upanishads, in Puranas. And I would look at Gita. I mean, I would not call it a myth, of course, but in Gita, all these facts, all these truths, is like a bouquet of truths have been presented in a summary form, and that too in a battlefield where a prince has to be encouraged to start fighting. So I think that's why it's a very, very relevant book. And there is nothing very mythical about Gita itself. You know, we actually in court, they put their hand on Gita and say, Gita ki kasam khata hu. But the thing is that how many people have really read Gita? And that is where, you know, my part came in. Sanskrit, how many people can read Sanskrit? And I think I elaborate more on it later. But you see, I consider Gita and the message in it not related to myth, but it's actually very, very, very scientific. The science and spirituality was talked about. But I think there are 5 shlokas in Gita that describe the origin of universe and its cycling and its destruction. And that view in about 5 or 6 shlokas, it goes so beautifully with our today's understanding. So God knows how did these people, their research or their meditation and their finding of truths. But all those facts have been accumulated in this book. And I have translated it for common people to be able to understand it.
Thank you, Rajeev ji. So, I mean, how old should a story be to make it a myth? Million years, billion years, 1,000 years, 500 years? My book, The Raja of Jongolbari, is based on a Bengali ballad, which is Maimonshunju Gitika, which was probably written around 400, 500 years back. But I would still say that it is mythology because mythology is also based on truth. A ballad, for example, is a mythology, and ballad has a lot of aspects of truth inbuilt into the story, which represents the emotional context of that era. Having said that, having talked of Gita, I believe the first word of Gita is Om. Know yourself. And how do you know yourself if you do not know the past? And for a region which Rajeev ji also talking, which is traditionally relied on oral history, and where the joint family has now given way to nuclear family, where everyone is busy, how do you pass on that oral history to your descendants? So, for example, and to just put it another side cut, India is a very interesting region. I call it a Europe. Because every state in India is a different country. I mean, you can just put in Europe and you can say that India is nothing but Europe with each state representing different country of Europe. And so when the Aryans first came to India, for example, and I will just quote from one of the initial preface of my book, when the Aryans reached Punjab, Bengal had already attained a high level of civilization. And when Aryans advanced up to Allahabad, they began to abuse Bengalis as speechless and devoid of religious sense, presumably being jealous of their distinctive culture. Not surprisingly, the early Aryans referred to Bengal as the land of Asuras. And what happens is that history only talks about the story of the winners. So when we talk about a regional aspect like Eastern India, there are not many actually stories that are there in history, but which have only been passed on through folklore, through mythology. I will just end with one classic lullaby, which I used to go to sleep when I was a kid. Shona Bhumolo, Para Jurolo, Borgira Elo Deshi, which means, Hashabai baby, go to sleep, the Marathas are attacking. I mean, this is just one example. There are countless more. And these have to come from mythology, because if you are going to do data analysis and trying to get this from factual representation, you will not get it. I will stop here because I mean, there are a lot of other questions to go through.
I think, I'll just add only a couple of things more, Twinkle, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think, mythology stays relevant in the modern times purely for the scientific observations as well as the cultural connections and the inheritance and the culture it has got. 3 or 4 examples. When we say Ravana rode Pushpaka Vimana, we don't believe it. When we say Rama built Ram Setu to reach Sri Lanka from Rameshwaram, we don't believe it. Rather, we need to fly on a plane to see it, the limestone track on the sea before actually evidencing it, to actually even believe it. So let us talk about the nuclear science and weaponry, right? When we say Ashwatthama actually used Brahmastra towards Parikshit Maharaj to kill him, Krishna saved him. And when we say the Daivyastras or the nuclear weapons existed even before, we don't. But in the 20th century, we invented it to kill each other. And that's when we believe it, something like that existed. One last thing, the Kauravas were born how? Right? It's basically nothing but what we do today, cloning. You can call it as, or otherwise, you can put any twist around it. Using one embryo, 100 of them were born. Do you need more scientific evidence on what existed in mythological scriptures compared to what is it in reality today? And that's where the relevance is. Let me stop there. Thank you.
So I guess if you want to conclude that, as per my understanding, shall be that something like, the ancient India was way modern than the modern India.
You can
It's
say
just that we never realized that. We never accepted that as a matter of fact.
we accepted it, but as I said before, we need metaphorical evidence as well as empirical evidence for everything
Yeah.
in this modern world.
So moving on to my next question.
I'm sorry. I think I'm sorry to say. I think the sun is like literally blaring here. Let me put the blinds. Otherwise, you are going to find me in a flashy environment. Give me 1 second.
No problem, no problem. So moving on to our next question, which is again open to the house. All the panelists can answer as per their own understandings. So India's cultural fabric is built on stories passed down through generations at large. As contemporary writers, how do you balance reverence for tradition with the need for reinterpretation for modern perspectives?
Any takers or should I go first?
I can take it, but I'll let you go first. So please, thank you.
Uh, so, I was talking about balance. Ballads carry the emotional truth of an era, even when the details aren't strictly factual. However, on the other side, modern readers who have grown up on a logical bend, who wants rationality, if you give them a kind of emotional aspect of an era without that rational aspect of it, without that logical aspect of it, they will think that we are just talking to the hat. So therefore, what needs to be done is this needs to be woven in a seamless manner. And you need to illuminate the different layers of the emotion and of the truth. And for that, what also at the very beginning is required is that you need to do proper research. Your research should be proper so that you are able to traverse that distance from the past into the present. And that then gives it the sense of identification, the sense of evidence, which then makes the reader interested in that book. So what I would say is that we need to walk a line between evidence and imagination, using reason to build the world and spirit to breathe life into it. So that's a very, very succinct way of putting it, I would say.
Agreed. I think Rajiv ji, why don't you go next?
Okay, sure. You talked about the perspective. I think if you look at the Indian history, then, for when the first Muslim attack came from Gauri, before that we had a certain way of education of society and all. But over the last 1,000 years, we are quite messed up. Our education system was totally changed. We have forgotten, in fact, our language, Sanskrit. Now, hardly very few people understand that language. And Hindi is actually relatively very recent language. And even defined, you see, it is not really that rich as Sanskrit is. Sanskrit is very rich language. And Hindi took over. It was very artificial kind of a division. And now, so I think for today's society to understand what our past was and what was our thinking and our history, especially spirituality and all, it's very difficult. See, nowadays, if you look at, I teach, I ask students, what do you read? Nobody reads nowadays. Sanskrit and Hindi, forget about it. Nobody reads. So, and I think if you ask parents to tell the children, that even parents don't know much. So I think we are in that way a precarious situation that we have really almost forgotten. And I think what is happening over the last couple of decades, there is kind of a renaissance which I'm seeing happening in the country. The people are trying to again reach their roots. And I think in that situation, it is very important that there should be books available which people can read. Now, if you see, I remember when I was at JNU, I chaired a session on National Manuscript Mission. And the Sanskrit people told us there are millions of scripts, of manuscripts that have not been read. And now I think recently our Prime Minister has started a new program whereby all these books will be read and they're digitalized and all that. So I think we are very, very poor in knowing our tradition and our spirituality. But this is that's why I'll say that, see, the book like 𝐒𝐫𝐞𝐽, I will say that crucial books in our spirituality, Upanishads and all that, must be translated and become available to common people, to students especially. And again, that, when we look at a commentary, how do you read a book in a different language? People write commentaries. And commentaries are always the interpretation. There's a shloka and you are commenting on it, so you are, So I think the way I have chosen is that I will not comment. What is the words there? Convert them into your language as it is now, because I think there's one thing very different between Gadya and Padya. The poem actually explodes inside you and you interpret your own meaning out of that. Whereas in a Padya, in a commentary, people are trying to explain to you their own point of view. So what I did for 𝐒𝐫𝐞𝐽 Madhuri was, take each slok and try to convert it into Hindi without changing any meaning or anything. It's up to you to now read. That is how, if we could read Sanskrit, we could have read it. But in Hindi now, you see, and then our age-old tradition of Shruti, as was pointed out, and very interestingly, when Indians have a lot of affinity to poetry, whatever is worthwhile for them, they will convert it into all shlokas, all Vedas, Mahabharata, Pura, and Ramayana. Everything is in shlokas, which are metered, because that helps you in remembering that. Well, you can't remember a whole text, but you can remember small poems. So I'd say the perspective of the society is now evolving, and there is a kind of a renaissance going on in India, and we are trying to reach to our ancient wisdom. And in that context, I would, put my own efforts in writing this book translation of Gita into 𝐒𝐫𝐞𝐽 Madhuri. I would mention it here that 𝐒𝐫𝐞𝐽 Madhuri has been serialized on YouTube as an animation. So people can, for each chapter there is a YouTube clip where we recite it and you can see that the AI has done the illustrations for all these. And this has happened very, very recently. I just mentioned it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeev ji. I think It's a very good question, by the way, in terms of what it is that you're asking. How the India's cultural fabric stay aligns as we retell the stories in the modern times. I think it never stayed static. That's my view. Any Purana, any Itihasa, anything that is very contemporary, which carried the Eastern wisdom that we are trying to give it away to people. So there are a couple of examples to it, and I think for example, we take the Ramayana. We have Valmiki who wrote it, Tulsidas who wrote it, Kamban who is from South India who wrote it. I think the retelling of the same Itihasa multiple times. Don't forget, Ramayana is being redone as a movie now with the latest trends, with none other than Hans Zimmer and A.R. Rahman going to produce musical for it. I think because we as a generation, we as a race, human beings, we are so focused on finding newness in what it is that we would like to see. The advanced technology has to be in it. Artificial intelligence, as Rajeev ji mentioned, Bhagavad Gita has to be translated and given it to people using artificial intelligence as technology as basis. I think the Ramayana, coming back to the example that I was giving, it stayed true despite multiple authors trying to retell it in different generations. The core of it, the crux of it, the content of it never change. It's the way you say it: poetry, modern times, passage, scriptures, novel, novella, whatever it is that you put to the people in such a way they can digest it. For example, I am trying to do the same thing in my book, Nectar on the Seven Hills. The urge and the objective of the book was to give the wisdom from Bhagavad Puranam as well as from Bhagavad Gita to the young generation as a fantasy adventure. And that has been successful. The book has become a national bestseller in the last year or so. Thanks to all the readers for giving me that reciprocation and endorsing it. I think where it goes wrong when it comes to retelling and confusing the facts with myths. I think there are two meanings to the word myth, by the way, right? Myth is an age-old story. Myth is also something that did not exist. So, and hence, I try to avoid using the word myth in many of the things that I say, because people think that it is not true. And I think, and hence, I also urge people to be careful in terms of how you say what you say. Now, coming to the retelling element of it, if the writers do not stick to the facts and try to deviate purely because of the commercial success aspect that they focus on, in terms of concocting facts as well as fiction into it and confuse the generations, for example, that's where it fails. And then India's cultural fabric will be affected. Then it will not stay true. The heritage will be lost. Why am I telling this? Today, to Rajeev ji's earlier message, that we all would like to give what we have written as authors in a modern way, because these days social media takes over. People would like to see everything under a 90-second video on portrait mode on your mobile phones, and hence everything is supposed to be shrunk and converted and given in a format that it is digestible by the readers or the watchers or whoever that is. And in that process, the writers do carry a huge responsibility to ensure stay true to the authentic scriptures, do not deviate too much away from it. So who did it the best? And I will give you another example. I'm sure we all know Srila Prabhupada, who is one of the best writers I have known in my years, and he had written more than 80 books in his time on this planet Earth, and he has sold more than 1 billion books, I would say. Especially the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam in particular. The one key call out that I would like to make is an authentic foundational wisdom from Bhagavatam was properly given in a modern way with proper scriptures, proper purpose, and translations and everybody by none other than Srila Prabhupada. That was done now. When was Bhagavata Purana written? Right? It was written by sage Veda Vyasa. right? There were only 3 or 4 times during the ancient history when Bhagavatam was spoken by the gods, demigods, or whoever that is, the sages, and then etc. The last it was spoken properly was at Naimisharanya. So how we in the modern times are inheriting it and giving it to the generations is what it is. And that's what I'm trying to do in my book, for example, Nectar on the Seven Hills. The last icing on the cake to all this is only one thing, and I will stop there, which is today's world is taken over by the GPTs, Chat GPT, and the other GPTs that are going to come soon. If we as writers are going to be fabricating the facts and try and give fiction in a different way to people, what happens is the bots are going to be misunderstanding it because it is generative AI, and it is going to confuse facts. And soon, it's not even a century I'm talking about, soon, people are going to be asking only ChatGPT to give them what is it that happened during the Opera Yuga. And if at all we had rewritten it as authors, something else, ChatGPT will give only that. And it isn't going to be a lot of time before people are going to be trusting what ChatGPT is telling is the only truth, nothing but the truth. And that's where things will fall apart. And that's why we as writers carry a huge responsibility to make sure that we stay true to the facts.
That's a very wonderful point of view, and I completely agree that people are relying so much on Chat GPT and other AI models that I don't think they're even cross-checking the information that nowadays people are getting from all the AI sources. So yes, staying true to the
Just
fact.
for the records, I'm not saying that bots and AI and the advancement in technology is wrong. I'm just saying that the responsibility of the authors is to make sure that we don't convert the facts into fabricated so-called facts. Then that becomes a norm, and that would mislead people. I think that's the only thing that I'm kind of insisting upon, that let us carry that responsibility as the author community, and then things will fall in place.
And adding to Prabhu's point, I mean, for example, the Raja of Jongolbari, it talks about culture of Bengal, which is not probably represented in Indian history in a big manner. And so when the underlying data is not there, when you're trying to ask ChatGPT to come out with answers to that, it will just be hallucinating. Uh, so the underlying data, as Prabhu rightly mentioned, that has to be in place. That has to be fact and not fiction.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with all the answers that Mr. Prabhuram gave on that, and the addition to which Mr. Bhaskar said that there are tendency of Chat GPT hallucinating if it does not have the sources of correct answers. So the main point is actually to correct the crux of it, the source of it, and when that is corrected, I don't think the foundation that is being made becomes the major problem. So let's move on to the
I'm
next.
sorry to check. Is the background still okay? Because I'm still seeing huge light at the back.
No,
Because
no,
of
it's fine.
Fine.
It's fine.
It looks fine.
You're well illuminated.
So, moving forward, now I will be asking all the authors separate questions regarding, something related to their book or their own ideology. But before moving forward with, the separate questions, my one last question for all of the panelists would be that, each of you approaches storytelling from a very different professional lens, scientific lens, financial, as well as management knowledge that you have. So, how do you reconcile rational knowledge with your spiritual understanding in your writing? Because that's a very tricky thing to do. You have two different POVs in that sense of the way. So, how do you put them into play?
Well, that's a tough one. But I would say it's about illuminating different layers of truth, because what happens with the rational knowledge grounds the story in authenticity. But understanding the historical context, the customs, the language, the politics, the material culture, the evolution, all that builds credibility into it. That part has basically the emotional truth of an era, which probably because it was passed through oral tradition is not much prevalent or not well understood in our progeny today. Whereas we are all trying to approach it from a part of logic, from a part of rationality. So we need to honor both the perspectives. And I probably talked about earlier that, like when I was writing the history of the Raja of Jongulbadi based on the ballad 𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐿 Gitika, one I needed to draw a line between evidence and imagination, using reason to like build the story, while using the spirit to breathe life into the characters, to breathe life into that particular context, to bring life into that era. But it requires a delicate mix between the two.
Okay. Mr. Rajiv?
Yeah. I think communication with the modern generation is extremely crucial because this generation is entirely different from what we were, and their attention span, the things they are interested in, and all. And in that, I think our responsibility of making them aware of what is the ancient wisdom of this country, what our thinkers evolved, that people are totally oblivious of that. And the way to communicate is, of course, to let them read it as it is, without making ornation on it or decorating it with other myths and all that. But it is very important that this generation should be introduced to where we were, and there's such an amazing depth of thinking in this country is nowhere else in the world. I mean, no other country. I mean, we have millions of manuscripts. Look here. I mean, people are talking about one book religion and all that, but we have so much of knowledge, and I think we have so much to do to communicate that in a form that today's generation can understand and feel more or less, be interested in it. You can tell them lots of things, but if they are not interested, they will not read. They can take a horse to water, but you can't make it make it drink. So I think that is what I think, that our tradition of this ancient country has to be communicated to the modern generation, and then only it can survive and go further. Thank you.
Mr. Prabhu?
Sure, thank you. I think in my view, both spirituality and science, it kind of tries to attempt the same impulse, which is the curiosity towards truth. When we talk about rational knowledge, it actually explores the mechanics of the truth. When it comes to spiritual understanding, it explores the meaning of the truth. So it's a subtle balance between the two things, if you know what I mean. Intellect, for example, it refines perception, whereas spirituality refines purpose, right? I think, what we as human beings are trying to do is to find purpose in our lives. But as I said before, the empirical, metaphorical examples and evidence, without that, we struggle to actually connect perceptions with purpose, with reality and whatnot. I think that's where the cookie crumbles. So what I try to do at least, is in my writing, I try to strike a balance between empirical evidence and the spiritual significance, as well as the truth and wisdom that every ancient telling has been trying to achieve, to cascade down so that it isn't lost. I think I'll give you only one example. I think that would kind of strike in of course, people probably might have read Nectar on the Seven Hills, which is my book, and of course it's a trilogy. And what it does is it kind of brings in wisdom from multiple civilizations and tries to connect the mythological significance and what is it. I think we spoke about Ramayana before. So if you go to the Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, you can go many places in Southeast Asia where there is a Ramayana equivalent. We already kind of touched this topic, part of the previous discussions that we have had. And I think in my story, for example, in the 7th century, there was this Chinese traveler, Huan is the person who came all the way from China through the Silk Road to Nalanda. And he actually stayed at Nalanda for more than a decade, exploring our Vedic wisdom, learning Buddhism, for example, reading and researching Buddhism. And when he actually left India, he took scores of scriptures away from India back to China. And I think then he actually translated those scriptures under the temple of Dazian in China. And I think you can kind of see the kind of the spiritual connections and significance. And I know it's different in terms of what is their mythological track is versus ours is, but there are resemblances, cultural significances between the two. So I think the point is that whether you call it as science, whether you call it as history, whether you call it as spirituality, or you call it as any part of the world, wherever it has cascaded and sprouted and grown into the tree of wisdom, the root, it is the same. Foundational wisdom. Every one of us are after the purpose and the meaning and the truth towards why we exist. And that science of self-realization, this is a book name, by the way, by Mr. Srila Prabhupada. Science of self-realization happens when we realize that there is a strong connection between the two. And that's what we as writers try to do, that connecting the dots and giving it, whether it is fiction, non-fiction, and everything. By the way, there is no reason for us to be just fictitious for everything that we say, right? We can always be more practical as well as factual with respect to what we say. I think hopefully that answers your question in terms of what you've been discussing as a subject.
I will just add one more thing. So I'm now reading Dan Brown's The Secret of Secrets. And over there, I've come across a term, noetic science. And noetic science is a study of human consciousness. So for centuries, we have explored these questions primarily through the lens of religion. But Nicholas Tesla told a very pertinent point, maybe around 70 years back. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries. That I thought was amazing.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah. So that comes up to the end of all the questions that I had for the panelist. Moving on to our next section, which enlists different questions for all the panelists. That is very much, I won't say particular, but very much detailed on their own books. So coming on to my first question, which is for Mr. Dr. Rajeev Saxena. As a scientist and academic, what inspired you to translate the Gita Kavya Madhuri into a poetic verse? And how did you balance creative expression with spiritual authenticity?
Good question. You see, I was born in a family with a lot of, love for Hindi and so. My mother was a professor of Sanskrit. But you see, all our brothers, 3 brothers, we all went to technical side, science and engineering and medicine. And so sanskaras would have been there. I would say my Mamaji was a stalwart in Hindi literature, Dr. Dharamveer Bharti, who was the editor of Dharmyuk, a very well-known figure. So we had a lot of atmosphere of literature and poetry in our home, but I myself never wrote anything. And it went till, I think, I was a visiting professor in North Carolina, West Virginia. And there my wife couldn't go. I was alone and I was totally immersed in my research, alone for 1 year. So something happened. Constantly when you're alone, you're thinking, you're doing chintan and all that. And something miraculous kind of happened then, that suddenly a whole wave of poetry came out of me. It was very unusual, I would say then. And what I was saying would come out in poetry, and I started writing them. And I said, okay, now I have this new thing. Why don't I use it to translate Gita? Because I always carry a copy of Gita with me. I'm very fond of that. My mother actually knew it by heart. She could, yeah, so he could. So I had the book with me and I started, and it started working. It took me, even then, there are 700 slokas in Gita. And it took me almost a year to finish the work. But, it only happened suddenly. There was nothing, no history behind that. And suddenly, I turned into a poet, and then I was doing this thing. The other thing is, I have not tried to interpret anything. And there are shlokas in Gita. I have just put it in a Hindi shloka rather than Sanskrit shloka. There are many shlokas which I also don't understand. You require a spiritual attainment of certain level to understand everything there. So I think it's something. I'll give you an example. Suppose you have a German book in chemistry. Okay, for a person, normal person like us, first of all, you must know the German language and then chemistry. Now here, all I have done is moved it from Sanskrit to Hindi. But the technical side of it, the spirituality, the message that comes, that has to still to be understood. Now only is that instead of 0.1% in India, maybe 60% people can read it who know Hindi, and then so there is no interpretation there. It is only as such you read what Lord is saying in Bhagavad Gita. So no myth in there, but I tell you, the point of view that comes through in Gita, as I said, it's a kind of a nichod, jaise kehte hain. It's a of Indian spirituality and our wisdom. It is one book which gives the outlines of everything. The only other book which I'm working on now is Patanjali's Yoga Darshan. You see, because that is such a great contribution by India to the world. Yoga and, move to Samadhi. You see, and that I have already translated the sutras in Patanjali Yoga, Yoga Darshana, into Hindi. But there I'll have to, because you see, these are sutras, so you have to write some explanation of that. But in Gita, that was not necessary. I think let a person read it and let it go inside him, and let him explore the meaning himself. Okay, I guess that was your question, that how it happened, how did it... so it really happened very suddenly. I was not aware of it. And after that, it has continued. Later, some people came to me, they said, why did this Gita is still complicated? Why don't you make a simpler version for children? And I wrote a long poem, very simple Hindi, Bal Gita, which Penguin Books published, became a very popular book, which has now been moved into cartoon animation for children on YouTube. So that is finding quite a audience with children who want to. And because the parents themselves don't know, but they really wish that their children should know. And there should be means they should provide for their children to get acquainted with these ideas. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Mr. Rajiv, for your answer. So, let's move on to Mr. Prabhu Ram for his question. So, basically, Nectar on the Seven Hills evokes a deeply symbolic title, spiritual nourishment across sacred landscapes. So, basically, what drew you to the intersection of place, divinity, and human experience in a narrative?
It's a good question. I think there is a phrase that comes in the book, which is an insistence phrase, by the way, because it's a trilogy. I said it constantly carries up until the trilogy finishes. I'm currently working on the second book. It says, right place at the right time to the right soul, which is when the deeper meaning of the spiritual wisdom reveals itself for them to carry out what it is that they need to do. So I think, and it kind of connects with the question that you're asking, which is divine place, sacred place, and time and everything related to the book. See, the setting for the book is the 7 hills of Tirupati, in Nectar on the 7 hills. That's why the name Nectar on the 7 hills. And there is, of course, as we know, it's a famous place of worship for Lord Vishnu, as Lord Venkateshwara in Andhra Pradesh that we are talking about. I think the setting was chosen to actually stay truthful to some of the elements that we try to sort of bring into the stories is narrative as well as the spiritual wisdom. If you go back and take I think we spoke a lot about what exists in scriptures and what was said before and the relevance of it to today's world and in everything. So many of what is said in many of the Puranas, whether it is Mount Meru, which was the huge colossal mountain that existed, and Naimisharanya, which is the forest where 80,000 sages lived and did penance to reach the abodes of the gods and whatnot. If you actually try to connect what exists in the scriptures to today's world, Tirupati is one best place where everything comes together, whether it is the setting, whether it is the divinity that we are talking about, whether it is the richness of what it is about the place in the scriptures that have been mentioned. So all I tried to do was to essentially do justice to what is in the scriptures and how we can kind of give it to the readers using a location of choice, and that does justice to the story that we are trying to give. And I think I kind of already answered earlier that unless and until we as authors try and do the narrative and recalibrate to the latest and greatest trend that is available in the market, you can't reach your audience because your audience will get bored. And then to Rajivji's earlier point, people will not read books. And hence what I was actually attempting to do was to concoct the mixture of wisdom available from the scriptures and stayed truthful to it, by the way, because there are slokas from Bhagavatam, slokas from Bhagavad Gita in my book. In my first book, which is The Pure Seed, in the Nectar on the 7 Hills trilogy, there are around 35 slokas from Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita blended into it. And the essence of that sloka kind of flows through the actual narrative. Don't forget, this is a fantasy adventure with 3 children doing an adventure in the forest. And this is kind of connecting because, the modern trend at the moment is, Twinkle, as we spoke about before, every latest mythological movie that has come in the past 10 years, it kind of tries to do only one thing, which is to bring an avatar to life. We have seen this in the latest movie that came, which is the Mahavatar, Narsimha movie that came, for example. People loved it because it stayed truthful to what was in the Bhagavatam and kind of narrates it the right way to people, and it times it right, which is in the modern times with the modern technology, right? The same thing with Kalki, the movie that came. I think the play Shambhala is mentioned in the book because that's where the story kind of finishes when the first part of the movie I'm talking about, Kalki, the latest movie that came with amazing star cast in it. Shambhala as a place is mentioned in Bhagavatam multiple times. Canto 12, if you go to chapter 2, Sloka 18, Shambhala is mentioned. And Canto 12, the age of deterioration, talks neatly and deeply about how in the modern age, which is Kali Yuga, the life would be shrunken life space, time, people literally living with quarrel, fight, war, whatnot, famine attacking people, diseases attacking people, consuming people, the rulers of the world becoming more and more corrupt, and people looking for what is it that they could actually get out of the system that they are in. How people will be struggling in the modern age, and how, towards the end of it all, in Shambhala, from Shambhala, Kalki will come to do the resurrect all of it. And that's how it goes. The point I'm trying to make is to stay truthful to the facts from the historic scriptures. Nectar on the Seven Hills is trying to do, or at least attempts to do, facts in the context of a sort of fiction blended fantasy adventure, so that it connects with people. And that's what has been the attempt that I've been doing in the last 3 years. Of course, similar to Rajiv ji mentioned, my first book took more than a couple of years to do, because it's a new narrative, putting the plots together, setting up the world, the rich world that I've built. For example, the readers and critics actually love the setting that they read when then they experience. For example, that's actually, I've been humbled by the reception that the book received, not because of anything, the hard work when the writers put in. They would like to see the endorsement from the readers, and without that, we cannot claim success as writers. And that, have been, by God's grace, have been a bit successful. And I'm just trying to do more justice to it in the coming books. And I think, hopefully, in Q1, the second book will be released. I've been extremely thankful to my publisher, Home Books International, and my agent, the Book Bakers, for example. They've been the pillars of support, as well as my media partners throughout. And we are trying to do more things, with artificial intelligence at the moment, to bring the story to life with some of the scenes and scriptures and everything that goes on in the book, to some meaningful sort of snippets that the people, as we mentioned, social media can kind of endorse it. Anyway, long story short, more to come. And thank you. Amazing question, by the way.
Thank you so much. So let's move on to the last question, that is from Mr. Bhaskar. So basically, your book blends history, myth, and human rebellion. Now, how do you use mythological undertones to explore themes of identity, belongingness, as well as migration?
Well, uh, human beings are usually loath to change, but change is probably the only constant in life. And when I was reading 𝐌𝐸𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿, I saw that all the themes of change in identity, belonging, and migration were already there in that ballad. So here was Isha Khan, the key protagonist of Raja of Jangalbari. He's born a Muslim person, but his forefathers came from a staunch Hindu family. In fact, his forefathers were from descendants of Harshavardhan of Kanauj. But his father, Isha Khan's father, was forced to convert into a Muslim, and he married the Nawab's daughter, the Bengal Nawab's daughter. And then he was the next in line to the throne. But then Sher Shuri, they attacked Bengal. His father was beheaded. Isa Khan was captured as a slave and taken off to distant Iran. Uh, that would have made any person really get into depression. But from there, he comes back. He comes back as a zamindar in Bengal. He marries a Hindu widow, and he leads the Bengal community to stand up to the Mughal might and makes Bengal independent. So this is this whole layer of changing dynamics all over there, which makes it a fantastic story. And it was the mythology only which helped me to explore. I didn't need to go out of my way to create the story. I just needed to bring it to life by proper research. And of course, thankful to Om Publications for publishing my book, and to my agent, the Book Bakers, represented by Suhail Mathur, because without him, this book would not have come into print. Thank you.
So, thank you so much to all the panelists for such a wonderful session. It was very enriching, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it.
Thank you, Twinkle. You are amazing host.
Thank you so much. So, we'll be taking leave from now. And thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you so much to all the audience as well for staying with us for the entire duration of the discussion of the author's marathon. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
Thank
much,
you.
Twinkle, for
Bye bye. Have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
know all of
Thank
you.
you guys
Thank you.
so
Meet
much.
you here. Bye bye.